Good morning and welcome to our session this morning. Our session is Higher Education, Leadership and Management, the Will to Power, addressing gender inequalities in higher education leadership. Thank you for being with us. A special thanks to our three speakers, who I will introduce in a few minutes, but first to Dr. Seale, who will introduce our session. I'm Birgit Schreiber and I'm the chair for the session. Thank you, Oliver. Oh, let me introduce you, Oliver. Dr. Oliver Seale is the Director of the Higher Education Leadership and Management of USAf and has recently directed the development of the National Women in Leadership Program. He has recently written a book on deanship in the South and is an ardent advocate for leveling gender asymmetries in higher education leadership. Thank you, Oliver. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Birgit, and good morning, colleagues. Very warm welcome to this very exciting session. We're really so happy to have you here, and we appreciate the time you've made to spend and engage with us. This is going to be a very dynamic engagement, I can assure you of that. We put together quite a heavy-hitting panel under Birgit's leadership, and it really is going to focus on one of our key stakeholders, internal stakeholders in the universities, and that's women in leadership. Often when we talk about engagement, it's a kind of external focus, but this is really more internal today, and finding ways to create an enabling and an empowering environment for women to succeed at all levels in university leadership. So I'm happy you can join us today. I look forward to a really dynamic and exciting event, and please encourage you to engage with our presenters, to engage with our session chair, and we look forward to you be part of this exciting event. So take care and thank you very much. Thank you, Birgit.
Thank you, Oliver, for these introductory words. For today, just a quick outline. We will have three speakers. We have Dr. Cyrill Walters, Dr. Judy Dlamini, and Professor Denise Zinn. We'll have them in sequence. So first one and then question and answer straight after the talk. It felt easier for us when we designed the session in terms of flow. So first we're starting with Dr. Cyrill Walters, who's a postdoctoral fellow in higher education studies at Stellenbosch University. She's a scholar of organizations with a special interest in complexity theories of leadership and institutional theories of curriculum. She has recently published her research on the impact of COVID on gender and in particular female academics. Cyrill, over to you.
Thank you, Birgit, for the introduction. I'm just going to get my slides up right now. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm coming here on behalf of a research team that looked at the impact of the pandemic-enforced lockdown on the scholarly work and productivity on women academics. We're a research team based across 3 different universities and completed this research over the lockdown period. So basically that is the virtual home for our research. And when we approached our research program, you will see that the key assumption was that we knew there was a gender gap within scientific research and publication. If you go to our website, we have done a complete review of the literature looking at the gender gap. What we also acknowledged and saw was that studies within the life sciences and STEM fields further demonstrated even a greater gender disparity in these fields. We also see that this gender gap, it's not only unique to South Africa, it actually exists the world over. And we see as more and more research is coming out through the pandemic, is that this pandemic has literally exacerbated this inequality within the academy. So some background to the study I'm going to talk about. We examined the impact of the enforced pandemic on female academics. We did a large-scale survey of all female academic staff across the 26 public universities. So that was our entire population. Our sample then consisted of 2,029 full responses. And if you're here and if you participated in the survey, thank you so much, because we really felt we had some incredible data coming out of the study. The actual survey was completed from the lockdown, which we know as stage 5, through to August to stage 2 in 2020. And as I said before, we had over 2,000 full responses. Just some data, when you look at our responses, the top 4, okay, was UNISA with 287, UP 185, Stellenbosch 172, and UCT 111. If you want to know exactly how many we got from each university, please, I'm happy to share more detail about the survey. All right, so the first key finding that came out was that the responsibilities which had a very high impact on academic work, you can see there in blue, childcare, and especially those female academics who had toddlers, almost 95% of them said that that issue had a very high impact on academic work, okay? We then also looked at school children. Obviously, there are roles with homeschooling and how you have to fit in, and then you can see the percentage of those that had no children. We can also see childcare, schoolwork. We look at housework, food preparation and supplies and how that affected. When we go to our respondents who had children, okay, we see there that the share of women who found academic extremely difficult by the ages of children in the home, okay? So these are the respondents that found it extremely difficult, and those are the ages. So we see there the highest is under 6 years old, which we defined as toddlers. And then coming in at close to 40% was school-going age, 6 to 18 years old. And so we see that female academics were caught up in the demands of competing roles, online teaching, nurturing students, comforting children, and finding time to do research and writing. What we also see, and that was quite profound, was the increase in the demands on teaching time during lockdown has effectively displaced the time available for research among female academics. You can see that we asked participants to gauge how much teaching and how much research they will be able to do, okay? And you can see the displacement there in the graph. What we also see that there was an incredible increase in administrative duties during the lockdown, okay? This becomes very clear. Very few people, respondents said almost none. And then almost 45% of respondents said they had much more administrative duties during the lockdown. And so besides teaching displacing research, administrative tasks also displace research time. A key finding of the study is that the lockdown has had a profound effect on women's academic productivity, okay? With 31.6% reporting having made no progress and 21.2% having made only some progress in completing a significant academic product. And that's what we see there, okay? We see that no progress or some progress is essentially half of our sample that just couldn't do it because of the displacement that came with a lockdown in terms of their work. So that were the key findings in the first part of the survey. I'm going to go on to the last part, okay, which was the qualitative section. So what we found is that in this section, which was an open-ended section where anything about the lockdown and how it affected your work, participants were able to talk about. We came with 5 essential themes that came through very strongly in the open-ended section. These are the shifting concept of home, childcare and academic work, academic guilt, self-esteem and self-worth, and your emotional well-being. And I'm going to go through some of the results with you and how we uncovered these themes. Okay, the shifting concept of home, okay? So we see it, home went from a place of refuge from the outside world to an unsettled notion of home as a congested, competitive, constrained place for women's academic work. It became a space that was claimed, conceded, and constantly negotiated between women academics and their partners, as well as the children and other occupants under the same roof. It became deeply unequal for women's work with dire consequences for academic careers. I want to share with you some quotes when we looked at home. Going to the office helped me put barriers between work and private life. Now these barriers are gone. It brought tension in the household and in time led to a deterioration of my relationship with my husband, soon to be ex-husband. I've been a bit sad, actually, to see how quickly my family casually renders me a servant when I'm constantly around and not able to avail myself of the professional workspace. And these are just 3 quotes of a complete sense of home that came through from our sample. Academic guilt came through very strongly. We describe academic guilt as a negative emotion that results from the perceived failure to meet an academic obligation. Academic women made difficult choices among competing demands, with some reporting that often work was chosen over attending to your children and teaching displaced research. We spoke about there are different forms of guilt. There's the coping guilt, productivity guilt, there's the relational guilt. This, our paper on guilt is available on our website. It's just been published in Women's Studies International Forum. Here are some quotes. At the moment, 2 courses are waiting for me, and I don't know if I have the mental strength to even start again. I feel defeated, and yet I feel guilty about it, like I should be able to cope. I am also feeling guilty that my own research has suffered because online teaching is intensive. It takes time in designing meaningful interaction and providing it on a variety of platforms that students could access it depending on what they had available. So academic guilt came through very strongly. Different types of guilt we found that came through very strongly in the results. Self-esteem and self-worth. We found that there was an excessive amount of negative emotional experiences related to self-worth, social comparisons, and fear of judgment and peer pressure. Every course has had to be radically redeveloped and dumbed down, and I constantly grapple with technology fails. This has diminished and undermined my sense of who I am as an academic professor and the quality of knowledge I am able to convey to students. I now appear foolish and incompetent, and nothing seems to work effectively. Another female academic said, one of the biggest issues with lockdown has been my need to keep everything going and not to show that I am struggling to juggle everything. I know come time for promotion, none of the men, and also not the women without younger children or older children that require special attention, are going to give me an inch of slack. It will be, well, you know, such and such did it. Why are you not able to? We then also looked at the theme of emotional well-being, okay? And so many women in the academy express a sense of frustration, weariness, and being overwhelmed. We refer to this in our paper as emotional taxation from 3 sources, okay? The home life, the social milieu, and the work environment. And this one quote summed it up so beautifully for us. You have to be the emotional rock for everyone and meet the demands of work. And in the end, your tank is running on empty. But you must smile. You cannot debrief yourself from work on your way home so that you can nurture your family. Work and home life are blended. and neither is getting the attention it needs. Your family asks you why you are grumpy all the time, because the new normal is not normal at all. The uncertainty is psychologically taxing, and this affects home life and work life. And so what we see is that, I think it's very encouraging that so many of our universities have provided emotional support for staff, but it is necessary, and even so now, because how taxing emotionally the enforced lockdown was on female academics. Other findings that empirically surfaced and critical issues that need to be mentioned, that there is gender equality in academia, there is a gendered nature of work, and this manifests itself in various ways in certain departments, in certain faculties, in certain institutions, okay? There are institutional practices that entrench the patriarchal nature of our society. And these came back very much in the open-ended section of the survey, where women lamented about the institutional practice they have to endure. That the burden of parenthood and care falls to women. Now, of course, traditionally, there's been shifts in how things have changed. And this, the burden of parenthood, it's not to say that it doesn't fall on men too. We've seen that. We just know that it's more on women, and that is why we then decided to only survey women, because we knew it will exacerbate them more in the gendered way we've seen how it works in the workplace. We also saw the importance of support structures, be that support structures within the home or personally, and the limited conception within the greater academic community about the digital engagement, about what digital engagement is and what its implications are for academics who perform it. And I think we can all agree that doing a lecture online just took so much more preparation when we had to pivot to online, and so much more thinking and so much more anxiety, because you have a different approach. It's a different pedagogy. And so I think that conception of going digital and the effect that it has and how it displaces other tasks for female academics was one of the key findings. Conclusions and challenges. We have written a policy brief, and this is something that we have disseminated, but we're very open to talking to any institution about our research. Firstly, one of the recommendations is that there needs to be changes in institutional policies to take account of and make provision for emotional health needs of academics, including counsel resources. And so what we've done is we've listed all the counseling resources across universities on the virtual home of our website, so that if there is a need and a female academic comes to our website and reads all our work, that she can see, okay, that's my institution, that's the person I can talk to. So we have made it available on our virtual home. Changes in institutional planning, and in particular performance management plans, must be made to moderate them so that the pressure to perform takes account of the realities of women's work under lockdown conditions. Have performance management, plans change? We know that with ad hominem promotions, research performance, research output is critical. What our research shows is that, over 50% of women said in the pandemic that they could finish nothing. They have no academic output. And so that institutional planning does support and acknowledge, and in particular then look at performance plans and how this can be addressed. Another way to address the challenges is the recognition and appropriate priority should be given to how work and family evolve through the academic career. The university has a responsibility to evaluate and delegitimize the organizational processes that produce gendered equalities. And so, you know, we saw that our women with very young kids under 6 years old, 95% said it's extremely difficult. We then saw that females with school-going kids also found it extremely difficult. And then we also saw that women that have no kids also have other responsibilities, be it a senior parent, be it students that they have to nurture, be it family members, that essentially all the nurturing roles, okay, comes on to the female academic. And so we should recognize and prioritize, okay, this appropriately, okay? And then finally, we talk about a deeper understanding of digital engagement and its effects for teaching. And then finding lasting and additional ways to support the student body. We found in our studies that especially at the UOTs, that there was so much support that was required emotionally, okay, from our female academics to students requiring their support, okay? And so we also need to find ways that that burden doesn't only fall on our female academic, but that there are other support structures for the student body right now. Okay, questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Cyrill. It was really amazing. And you know what comes out of the room is a lot of voices, people saying how it is so comforting to hear that your research is confirming what a lot of women feel. And it's mirroring the experience a lot of us. So I've got quite a few questions here. Can we start with, there were a few questions about the need for institutional responses on an institutional and kind of policy level. And I hear that in your recommendation that you're doing work with the institutions to adjust some of the policies, some of the HR policies, research support policies, those sorts of things. The NRF's policy for research support is about sort of emerging scholars, which is very young, which often excludes, it also kind of has a gendered component to it. So your work could be with the institutions, but also going further into NRF and so forth. Can I give you the one question?
Sure.
How much responsibility should our employers bear for knowingly placing additional demands on our academics in this sort of imbalanced way? What are your feelings around that, or your thoughts?
I think firstly, before we get into the responsibility, is the acknowledgement that you are doing much more than before. I think what we need is the recognition, first of all, to see that a lot is going on and it is impossible to deal with all this. In the responsibility, I think, what we saw in a lot of the open-ended and in the more positive in comments that respondents made is when the HOD would just, have a casual meeting and everybody's saying how they're coping, how they're dealing with, these things, what they're feeling, what their fears are, and just getting that emotional support from your colleagues saying it's okay. And so we found that even though the majority of our respondents felt they're not being recognized, they're overworked, they're burnt out, there were those that said, actually, I'm more closer to my colleagues now than I've ever been before, because we have found a way to support each other. So I think between your department, between your faculty, and then broader the institution, there are different ways that we need to, and especially if you are a female in a leadership position, you've got to be very aware of what it needs. And that, just, I think, acknowledging and talking about it is a first step.
Cyrill, there's an interesting point made about offering counseling services to women and how, to some extent, perhaps it runs the risk of communicating that women are responsible for their own stresses, and if they would only manage their times or their stresses or their internal worlds a bit better, they wouldn't be so stressed. And that might be sort of implicit in counseling support. Can you respond perhaps to that and think about, caring in a university? Does a caring university provide counseling, or does a caring university adjust its policies?
You know, there's complexity in these issues here. There's no perfect answer, and there's so many things that come into play. And so I think that in terms of counseling, you know, in some institutions, there is prejudice. It's personal, it's everybody's choice, be it, you know, do it personally, professionally. So I don't quite know, because I've never been in the position where I was, you know, I was looked upon as sort of being weak because I was seeking assistance. So that sort of part of the question, I don't really know how to, you know, explain. I think what we all know is that we need it. We need the emotional support, and it, you know, it actually shows strength of your acknowledgement that I actually need this, and that's why I think so many institutions have provided wellness and support now. And this is something that we went to every institution to ask what they are doing, and they came back to us.
There's a quick question about methodology. Why were it appears that the private institutions weren't included. Is that true?
Yes, it was the 26 public universities. You know, it's sort of, you're doing research, and in hindsight, you could have done so much more. And so I think, believe me, to get ethical clearance from 26 institutions, I can write a book on that. It literally took 3 months, and it's almost a full-time job. So I think it was just, I guess, just easier to do the 26. We would have loved to do the private institutions, but to get to, you know, to get the survey off in time, and it's also that time-sensitive research. So you've got to get it off quickly. Doing ethical clearance for, you know, another 30 institutions would have set us back, and we couldn't have started even last year.
Okay.
And I think it offers a follow-up study to expand the base of not just the public universities, but the private universities as well.
Yeah. So can I ask you a last question
Sure.
from Dr. Kerry McCullough? She says she would love to know about what you found about institutional practices that entrench the patriarchal nature of our society.
Yeah, so, you know, it's sort of general comments that came through about how certain women are expected to do certain jobs, to teach certain courses in certain departments, because it's not really respected, it's just expected. Or that the way that their male colleagues would talk over them in a meeting, all these gendered ways came out in how women felt. The workloads they felt, they didn't have much of a say. Most of them had male HODs. And so various ways, I can, you know, if Kerry wants to see more about that, what we don't do is we don't do it per institution. It was very much a sectorial study. And for ethical reasons, obviously, we will not filter by institution and what those gendered ways are. But it came through very strongly how females felt they were treated at times by their male academic counterparts.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And there's so many comments coming through, and it's really lovely to see so many people in the audience, or in the, you know, participants in the room out there. So the one question is, could you please share a link to your publication, which Michelle can...
I'll do it right now. Okay.
That'd be lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Walters, that was so instructive and so mirroring of what our experiences have been about. Our next speaker, I'm going to Dr. Judy Dlamini. In 2020, the Forbes magazine called Dr. Judy Dlamini one of Africa's 50 most powerful women. Judy is a businesswoman and who's also the Chancellor of WITS and founding chairperson of Mbekani Group, and a formidable woman and lovely speaker. Judy, over to you. We look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Birgit. Good morning, colleagues, and thanks for very informative research to the data. it confirms just how it was and is, continues to be, but also there is...
Judy, may I interrupt you for a minute? Judy, I apologize for interrupting you. I'm going to double check your microphone. It comes through as a quite a very, very crackling. I'm going to check with our tech team if that's coming through in the conference room as well.
Okay. I'll wait for you to indicate. Thanks, Birgit.
Because we might want to fix up that microphone and then ask Professor Zinn to start first. I'm going to check with the tech team. Michelle, can you tell us?
We think it's on Judy's side. It might be the connection. It doesn't seem to be on our side.
Would you agree? Can we ask Professor Zinn to go first and then come back to Dr. Dlamini and just check your microphone? Is that all right?
Okay. Okay.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
This is the online life, and we're all patient, and we don't, you know, that happens to all of us. So it's not to worry about that. If the tech team can help you with the microphone on your side. Professor Zinn, we're going to move you right forward, if you don't mind. Denise, that's great.
Yes, sure.
Lovely. So I've got the pleasure of introducing Professor Denise Zinn, who was the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Teaching and Learning at the Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth, and was previously the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Education at what was then NMU, I think, in MMU, and also the Executive Dean of Faculty of Education at Fort Hare University. And currently, Professor Zinn is the Program Leader for WIL at HELM at USAf. So Denise, we look forward to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Birgit, and welcome to all those who are listening in and to my colleagues in the Zoom room who are part of this panel. I have great admiration for all of them, and it's such a pleasure to be on the same platform with them today. So can you see my, my PowerPoint? Is it coming through clearly?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, good. All right, so the session today actually took its name from our program, thanks to Oliver, The Will to Power. And for me, the focus is going to be on some of the things we do in our program. But I want to borrow, first of all, from our international guest on the first day of the conference, Ira Harkavy. He spoke about the Noah principle, and that intrigued me, and I started doing all kinds of research on this Noah principle, and I love it because the statement goes, there will be no more credit given for predicting rain. It's time to build the ark. There's also a group by the name of Groundation that has a whole album on building an ark. But I'll give you a sense in this presentation of how we tried to build an ark. I'm just putting on my timer. Thank you. So the focus in this session is really to ask some fundamental questions, those fundamental why, who, how, where, and when, and so what questions. Coming to the why question. There's been so much research and of course HELM did its research as well, and some of that information is in the prospectus which we're uploading into the repository, but of course the work of people like Cyrill Walters and the team which included Professor Ronnie and others is really groundbreaking South African research that shows why there is a need for a many programs for women in leadership, and ours is but one of them, and I will tell you a little bit about how that works. The who in our program is for middle to senior leaders. They are people who have participated previously in the Foundations of Leadership programs that are part of the HELM programs, and this is how we have been able to identify those who have had the grounding that comes from the Foundations of Leadership course. The picture on the left is last year's cohort. We had a group of 26 women from 15 different institutions. And this year, our cohort is made up of 31 women. Also, last year's, I think it was from 17 institutions, this year from 15 institutions. So the photo is small, but those who are in the audience will recognize themselves in there. So the what question, what did we focus on in every session? We had 9 sessions that focused on particular areas that we thought were really necessary to give attention to, and these ranged from, besides the introductory session, leading from your strengths and leading with purpose. Our approach was one of starting from the inside out. We then moved to focusing on power, politics, and leadership. There's so much of that, as you all know. And then we situated this within a theory of change, and in particular, the idea of complexity and how that fashions and informs how we think about change and leadership in the 21st century. We looked at successful institutions because all of us, our work that we do as leaders is situated within an institution that has certain goals for success. We looked at people strategies. This was a very big area because a lot of the leadership and management challenges that people experience are in dealing with people. We looked at academic planning. We found that many leaders did not, especially from the HOD level, sometimes at the dean level as well, did not really understand how academic planning took place in the institution as a whole. And then towards the end of that year, we had 2 consolidation retreats. The first one focusing on career planning and self-care, which emerged as a very strong component. And then in the last 4-day retreat, we looked at internationalization, globalization, and something that had not been planned for, but that emerged throughout all of the sessions was the impact of the COVID pandemic. And in fact, Cyrill and Linda Ronnie from UCT made a very, very important presentation on their research at that last session. But it was more than the content. Within the content, we had a series of guest presenters who were really key senior women leaders within the academy, mostly in South Africa, but we also had a few international speakers who had traveled the same road as our participants. They were VCs, DVCs, registrars, people, executive directors in HR, and various leadership experts, but most of them spoke to their own stories, what they had experienced along the way. And it was this that inspired, I think, a lot of the women participants in the group to really see that this was not a road that was necessarily untraveled. It had been traveled by really strong women who had fallen along the way and picked themselves up and had something to share, and to whom they could now go as part of a network. Another component of the program was the establishment of peer learning groups. These were smaller groups, about 4 to 5 people who met regularly in between the fortnightly sessions, and they could apply what they were learning in those sessions to their own context. They could learn from each other, because we set up those groups in such a way that people came from different institutions. And this developed a really strong sense of camaraderie, I think lifelong friendships, and a network to whom people can go for as long as they continue to work in this environment and beyond. And then a third component was coaching. We set up individual coaching. We have a pool of coaches who worked individually with every participant over the course of 4 sessions. And this year we've included those to 6 sessions, because as Cyrill said in the previous presentation, support is really critical. And this was one-on-one attention that was given to the particular individual issues that the participant, the leader, was experiencing. And we did an evaluation of the program after its first pilot. and after its pilot. And this particular component, the coaching, was something that many people had not experienced before, had not had the privilege of engaging with somebody who gave them individual attention, where they could bare their souls, they could be vulnerable, and seemed to have been quite a highlight of the program that came through in the evaluation. So the how question, and I'm going to include in the how, the where and the when. As we consider curriculum, in my previous position at Nelson Mandela University, we focused very strongly on humanizing pedagogies. And what you see on the screen in the PowerPoint slide there is, on the right-hand side, a framework that we developed at our university, Nelson Mandela, that was a curriculum framework, the kinds of issues and questions we needed to think about as we develop a curriculum. And now, of course, with us going online with this particular program, it was looking at how does one humanize within an online learning platform. And I'll give you some indication of some of those, but I think the recurring underpinning philosophy was, how does one exercise a humanizing pedagogy? And before I move on to one or two of those, the duration of the program was a very important component. It ran over a period of 6 months, which means that it wasn't a 2-day workshop, even a week-long workshop. It was something that ran from September through to March the following year, which gave a lot of time for growth and reflection. And reflection, indeed, was one of the most important aspects of this program. We thought it really important to incorporate the arts for something to be humanizing. I think our humanness is so related to the arts, is so expressed through the arts. And so we try to bring this in to a lot of the group work sessions, into a lot of the presentations. And a really delightful feature of our program was that we found an artist, Rebecca Hayter, who did a visual documentation of every session. And as people were talking, as the groups were breaking up into group work, she would pop in and she would capture in pictures some of those main themes. And those then stand as a record, a summary of some of the issues that were dealt with. I'm sure you can't see it very clearly in the screen, but that is just to give you a sense. And then, of course, music came in all the time. The picture on the right is of Tina Scow, a Cape Town musician, and she actually did the theme song for, or we used one of her pieces as the theme song for last year's cohort, and again, for this year's cohort, a different song by her. And not just her, we used Playing for Change, we used their videos, you found appropriate music that would embody and enliven our sessions. So these are some of the ways we try to humanize. But of course, a humanizing pedagogy is more than your technologies. It's also about knowing your participants. It's about understanding who they are, where they come from. It's about being prepared to learn from them as well as with them. It's about acknowledging mutual vulnerability. There's a paper written by Andre Keert, myself, and Kim Porteous that talks about mutual vulnerability as a key component of a humanizing pedagogy. We used their contexts and their backgrounds and expected them to apply them in their contexts and backgrounds so that the material and the discussions were relevant. We used inclusive social technologies like group work, World Cafe, a number of different techniques that got them all engaged, all their voices heard. And acknowledging and developing the whole human being was really critical to this program, starting with the self and then moving to the engagements with others along the lines of the Ubuntu principle. So through all of this, we came up with a theory of change, and we were helped in our efforts to put this into an infographic by Megan Franklin, who did the evaluation. She's part of a group that's called Measure, that it's her company. together with one or two other people. And Megan Franklin was able to do an evaluation that was not simply a log frame evaluation of what targets do we meet and how do we get to tick boxes and count numbers. It was a really qualitative engagement with the participants as well as with ourselves in terms of what it is we were trying to do. I'm sure you can't read the screen, but the PowerPoint will be available because it speaks to some of the personal and contextual factors. It speaks to some of the assumptions that underlay what we were doing. It spoke to some of the conditions that we expected to be in place and assumptions about what we expected universities to be able to do in terms of support. The crux of it, however, is in this particular piece that was in the middle of that infographic. And it is really about the so what question, the last question that I want to just focus on. And that is, how does one embed change within an institution? And so starting from that innermost circle, from the inside out, as I said, we started with participants' self-awareness and the ways in which they would incorporate who they were, find out about their strengths, find out about how they engaged with others, look at their weaknesses, look at differences in the ways they and the staff and colleagues had of orienting, and from that be able to move to the next level, which was their leadership capacity. And the program then moves into looking at developing their leadership capacity. That increases as their self-awareness increases, and they have an enhanced perspective of the higher education environment through their engagement with presenters and the content of the course. As this continues to grow over the duration of the program, participants' sense of agency and power increase. And we see that in the comments that they give via feedback, in the communications that we have with them throughout the program. This deepens into participants applying their learning and agency in the higher education context. A lot of the assignments we gave them expected them to actually do that. They would discuss this with their peers and they would write about it in reflective assignments. This, we think, is an important focus because it starts to see people living the change. And the evaluation captured many comments from participants that spoke to how they started to live that change. The evaluation will be available on HELM's website if anybody wants to have a look at that at some point, but we also have living participants who might be able to speak to that once you find them. And we find that as the numbers grow, as the numbers of the cohorts grow, by the end of this cohort, we'll have 50 people across 17 to 20 institutions who will have been part of it. They will have formed networks amongst one another. And as these continue to grow and as the research grows that they will continue to do and are doing at the moment, we see that the higher education contexts will begin to transform. After one cohort, of course, that may not yet be visible, but our intention and aspiration is that we'll start feeling the change as the nature of this empowerment, this will to power, starts growing. So that is really where a picture of the program. And I see I have 4 minutes left, and I always look for an opportunity to read a poem, because part of the engagement within the WIL program is that participants reflect regularly. This came out as an abiding practice within the WIL program. Within sessions, people were asked to write, to do free writing, reflecting on something that had just come up. They were expected to write in their journals. They were expected to extract from their journals phrases and meaningful statements, and we guided them into how to compose these into poems. And here's one that was written by Dr. Latifa Furfure from Stellenbosch University, that is in the form of what we call a palindrome poem. And it captures a lot of what she experienced, but also advice that she was giving to future cohorts. And as the network grows, we know that these will be inspirational words to them. So I'll use my last few minutes to read this poem. It's called Be Brave, Persist, Move Forward. It's also the first line of the poem. Be brave, persist, move forward. Draw strength and support from your sisters in the room. All of them are an inspiration, a cohort of successful women. You're not alone. The journey will be long and arduous. Too few women at the top, especially in healthcare. There's much work to do. Be brave, persist, move forward. There's much work to do, especially in healthcare. Too few women at the top. The journey will be long and arduous. You're not alone. A cohort of successful women. All of them are an inspiration. Draw strength and support from your sisters in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. It was lovely, and especially because I'm so involved in the program, and hearing you speak so succinctly about it is lovely. Denise, there are some questions that have come through. Can I start straight away and ask, one question is, how do we address institutional and structural challenges faced by higher education women in leadership? And how should we address this at a policy systems level?
Thanks for that question, because it really merges with the questions that came to Cyrill Walters based on their study. I think one of the most important areas, of course, is to build the arc. I think it is important to recognize that it has to come from us as much as it has to come from everywhere else. So it's about taking responsibility and exercising agency. But also, I think, especially the kind of research that has been done in South Africa by Cyrill and a team, I think all institutions need to focus on that. I think it should be a presentation at the Senate in every institution. I think higher education, leadership and management, and USAf need to recognize the criticality of that kind of research, and at least bring it on board to acknowledge, as Cyrill said, what is happening to especially women under these kinds of conditions, but also under conditions that weren't COVID. These kinds of things were happening. They were simply being exacerbated 100-fold by these conditions. But then I think my second point is about exercising our own agency and developing networks where we can help each other.
Denise, I'm wondering, are there lovely comments I can see of appreciation, and people who are in the program who love hearing you speak. Can I ask you about, if somebody were to level criticism against the program and say, is it upon women to do this kind of work? Is it upon women to initiate and make the changes that need to be made? How would you respond to that? What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks for that question, because it actually comes up from our participants as well. Last year, very fiercely strong women were saying, why us? Why do we have to do this? And of course, that's a very important question. And there are two main answers to it. The first is that it shouldn't only be up to women. There has to be mutual responsibility for this. We cannot leave institutions off the hook, nor can we leave men off the hook in terms of taking responsibility for the change that needs to happen. But having said that, the other part of the answer I would give is that research has also shown that these kinds of programs are really important in creating a safe space where people can share, where women in particular can share what they then find is common. It is not about them. It is not something that is a failing that comes from them. It is actually something that is systemic. It is something that they need to consciously relate to. And I'm furiously looking for a comment that came from the research, and I want to read this. This one, it says, the experience of a very negative, hostile environment of my workplace, the WIL program is like a safe haven in comparison. It allowed us to open and share similar ideas that made me realize that something needs to be done in the space of higher education, because we all have similar experiences. So really, there's a both and here.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's great. Denise, I'm also seeing another question. There's the valuation that was done. There was a lot of emphasis on trying to capture the complexities. And I wonder if you can say a little bit about whether the program impacts in the short term. How do we know there's a long-term impact on it? How do we know the sorts of more macro changes that come from this kind of program?
Yeah, I think monitoring and evaluation is a very important part of it. We put that in place right from the first cohort, and we developed monitoring and evaluation tools, which of course have to be longitudinal. But from this first cohort already, there are so many people who have already moved up. And I can't say it's just because of the program, of course, but because of their own sense of confidence that this is something that they can do and that there is support for them. So people have been promoted into positions of deans, deputy deans, directors. I think there are at least 8 to 10 within the first cohort of 26 where that has happened, if not more. But the evaluation also showed, the qualitative aspect of the evaluation showed how in those circles that I showed, the embedded change circles, how people were moving through those from self to application to empowerment, some even going up as far as the fourth circle, which was applying their learning and agency within the higher education. And of course, it's only when multiple people start drawing on that we will start feeling the change. But I think the longitudinal monitoring of this, which we will do thanks to the tools that we now have developed with the help of Megan Franklin, will allow us to do some longitudinal research on this.
And the comments coming through saying, indeed, we need policy reframing to address the gender issues. And then somebody quite nicely echoed some of what you were saying we need to manage the polarities between the agency of the self and the agency of the system. It's a kind of in the synergy of both. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I can only concur with that. Mm-hmm. And I think it really meshes with the research being done by people like Cyrill in the CARS study, where it was about what are the recommendations that need to be taken up at a policy level, at an institutional level, and then what is it that we have to do ourselves. I see a comment from Michelle there.
I know. I just, do you want to read it?
No, you read it.
It must also start by acknowledgement by all players. Workplace realities and challenges need to be acknowledged. Believe that it must be successful if ran by women. You need to be the one feeling the heat of the fire to move away from the fire or to just extinguish the fire. Thank you. That's I suspect a person who would love your poems, who appreciates your poems, a person who speaks in images like that. Denise, thank you so much for that. I want to move on to the next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will have a chance right at the end when we'll ask all the speakers for some closing comments. But for now, let us move to Dr. Judy Dlamini, who has fixed her microphone, I think.
I hope so too.
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.
Lovely.
Thanks very much.
Judy, can I read your bio just briefly? Because it is just so impressive. Just again, those key words that you were named the most powerful and formidable woman in Africa, amongst the 50 most in Africa in 2020, being a businesswoman and author, and of course the Chancellor of WITS and the founding chairperson of Mbekani Group. So we look forward to your talk, and thank you very much for presenting it to us.
Thank you. Thanks very much for your patience, and good morning, colleagues. I just want to share my presentation.
Yes, we can see it. That's lovely.
Great.
Full screen.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and it's actually thanks to Cyrill and Denise on the presentations. I'm encouraged that there will be a longitudinal study on the women that went through the program, because one of the challenges is just the institutional and structural hostility, if you like, for women. So I think a longitudinal study to ensure that they come out feeling invigorated to take the leadership positions, but they don't get frustrated by the structure and the culture that they encounter when they go back. I always remind myself why transformation matters, because if you've lived for as long as I have, you know we've been talking about this forever. But is leadership transformed, not just in higher education, but everywhere, actually, all sectors and globally? It's not, and it's important for us to remind ourselves why it matters, because institutions of higher learning reflect society. And when you look at gender inequality, which in some measure also translates to gender abuse, to femicide, it is because we are not reaching the gender equality that is required. So I believe that we need to stay at it, and I'm happy that we've shared the research that actually just reminds us that we still have challenges. COVID made them worse. It took us back in so many ways, especially when it comes to gender and social class. And so the struggle does continue, and it doesn't get any better. So I just thought I would look at a few challenges and then look at the intervention, a small intervention that I actually have started, so that I also contribute to the change that I want to see. At institutional level, I was just going through different papers. One of them saying historically the institutions were created by men for men and incorporate and normalize a patriarchal dividend. And those are specifically white middle-class men. And the challenge that I find in institutions is that even when the leadership changes, the structure is so inculcated that the behavior doesn't change. So there's more to it than just, changing leadership, because when you look at structures that are exclusionary, it's funny how you walk into a room that has no one inside, but because of the room itself, you almost have a feeling of how you expect it to behave. So I'm saying this because it's very important for leadership that we need to realize that we need to be gender sensitive, even in the room, Does it represent someone who is different? And is it embracing of a Black woman, for instance? If you walked into a room where decisions are made and all you find are these pictures of men, old men, it sends a certain message to the person who enters the room. And small things do matter. So when we talk about structures, it's important to realize that it goes way deeper than just the policies, the practices. It actually influences how people behave. I think this has been mentioned already from the study that Cyrill has shared. The barriers that women face even before COVID, the research barriers, the teaching loads that women actually are given, and no sufficient time for research, heavy administrative workload. And the muzzling of women's voices, even when they have a seat at the table, the language that makes women feel small, that has to be addressed. by the leadership. And even women experiencing overt and covert racism, sexism, with the patriarchal interactions that they encounter in our institutions. One of the things that I'm really passionate about, because I've experienced it firsthand, is the importance of looking at the intersection of different social identities when you address challenges, the intersection at different levels of the challenges. Because in this country, when you talk Black, you're talking at least 3 different groups. And it's easy to say, well, we're doing well when it comes to the Black race. But unless you dig deeper into what does that look like, you need to peel the onion, because you tend to ignore and marginalize the biggest social group in the country if you don't do that. I like what actually the past executive director of UN Women says, that when you solve a challenge, you need to solve for the weakest in the value chain, because when you do that, then the rest can take care of themselves. But you can't do that unless you have an intersectional lens. Intersectionality accurately describes the way people from different backgrounds encounter the world. The lived experiences and experiences of discrimination of a Black woman will be different from those of a white woman or a Black man, for example. So we have to be quite intentional and deliberate in identifying those frustrations that are encountered by different social groups within our institutions. I think it's very important to have a gender competent leader, because a gender competent leader will be sensitive to how people of different gender experience the workplace, and how people of different social identities within a gender experience the institution, and do something about it. We need to transform the historically created structures and culture, as I have explained, which actually lingers on even when there is a change in leadership, because this is how we behave in this institution, because that's the right way. And who decided that? If there is a change in leadership and or the students that we have, shouldn't there be a change, a way of doing that is embracive, that is inclusive, where they can see themselves? So it's also important to allocate resources to address the change, and then monitor consequential management. That's very important, because just doing the studies, just telling us where we are and not doing anything to change it or enough is obviously a challenge that's not going to assist us. I don't think heads of institutions will like this, where we talk about linking state funding to indicators of structural and cultural change, but something has to be done. We need to measure how we're doing in terms of that change, and reward those that are doing the change that we expect. So just briefly, I wanted to share that after doing a desktop analysis, when I entered academia, even just as a tutelage head, I realized how not using an intersectional lens in looking at transformation actually ignored a group of Black women specifically. And it's mainly African and Africans of mixed descent that tend to be neglected. And I won't bore you with statistics, but it just shows just how we are not reflecting those two social groups when it comes to leadership at our institutions, the whole country actually, including my very own. So we set out as SFALF with the support of the WITS executive, which I'm grateful for, to make a change. Make a change that will support women of the minority group, and also in so doing, create role models for the majority of the student body, because it's one thing to have a student body that changes, but you don't reflect people who look like them in leadership, and you expect them to come back and blow back by being in the academic sector. We need to reflect the people we want to attract, because if we don't, then how are we going to attract them? So in the FARF, which is a very young organization, FARF standing for Female Academic Leaders Fellowship, our job, our intention is to develop female academic leaders that are Black, and deliberately so because of the numbers that tell us there has been neglect. We encourage peer-to-peer mentorship. The poem actually that Denise read talks to that the assistants in the room support them. They'll support you back. And one of the things that was very important when we selected the first cohort is to ensure that it's multidisciplinary. And it is our hope that there will be multi-institutional collaboration when it comes to research and community outreach. As I speak, we're talking to a colleague at the University of Johannesburg, looking at doing research together with the fellows within FARF. Our values are diversity and inclusion. When I looked at the theme of this seminar conference, talking about the engaged university, I was tempted to say engaged and inclusive, because inclusivity, we have to talk about the importance of inclusivity all the time till we actually feel and experience that inclusivity, which is so lacking in most of our institutions, if not all of them. So just to share with you the first cohort of the Chancellor's Fellows, as we call them, it's 30 very accomplished women who just need that support to make sure that they are ready for the leadership positions that they are so capable of handling. And that is the racial split, which almost reflects the demographics in our own society. And that is the spread of the departments with the health sciences and humanities actually having a higher number. So I would like to conclude with this quote, that the world is changed by your example and not by your opinion. So it's very important that as leaders, and I know I speak for most people that are actually in this session, that who already do so much, that as leaders, we actually need to do something to make the change, but more importantly, collaborate with other like-minded people. And I am hoping that through the FARF program, we will have more collaboration across the 26 institutions that we have in the country. Thanks very much, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dlamini. This is lovely. And I can see there's a lot of interest from the floor, from the participants in the room. Good just to hear more about the program. I wonder if right at the end we could ask you just to post a link into the chat so it can be sent into the room. That would be lovely right at the end. Can I read you the first question that has come through? It says, it's a shame that women in academic institutional leadership must still be subject to overt and covert sexism and racism when engaging in leadership decision-making. What other resources can institutions, oops, I've lost it. Can institutions consider allocating to address this position? Is it enough that there are MDP programs, for example, What more can be done than these kinds of support programs?
That's a very important question. And I think the leadership within universities needs to be quite proactive in making the change and investing the resources. Because if you just look at women, it's not just gender and race, it's also ageism. You have the NRF, which will actually allocate funds for young women. And guess what? Women have to take time out of academia and or just because they are raising families. So putting this cap of 35 for certain programs shouldn't be happening for women, because we have to be sensitive of the realities of women. So I do think that more has to be done by executive leadership at universities, and also the institutions like the NRF, just being sensitive that when it comes to gender, it's quite difficult to apply this age limit for women who want to get funds to do research or whatever else that they need to do.
Thank you. And there is a comment from Brightness Mangolotti, who's also with us on the World Programme, and of course the director of HERS. Brightness wrote that a blanket approach globally is still used to women development, but it's encouraging to see that Dr. Dlamini is flagging the need for intersectionality as a transformative lens to advance women development intervention. Can you say a little bit more about intersectionality and the importance of it for women development, female development?
Yes, you know, actually I had quite a few graphs that I removed that show just how important intersectionality is, because when you say we actually need to transform the race, what happens is that you look at black and white, and who actually gains out of that? It's black men, because every social identity of privilege enables you to have the first bite at the cherry, if you like. And who actually suffers? Black women, because we have no social identity of privilege. You are black, that's against you. You are a woman, that's against you. God forbid you are disabled, you know? So I think it's very important. And when we address one social identity challenge at a time, we just pile up the problem without addressing it holistically. The other way of saying it, to be honest, is a holistic approach. And we need women, all women, at all levels of leadership, not just executive, middle, and even a lower level than that. I hope I've actually answered the intersectional dimension.
Yeah, no, that's very, very important. Just a lovely comment that's come through saying that it's a powerful statement you made about not just looking at where we are, but how that change then has to happen to ensure the next study finds something different. Mm. The kind of the longevity of an intervention is all grounded here.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And it's very important, Birgit, because sometimes you empower women, they come out of the WIL program, they are ready to take up the world, and they come to an institution that just stifles them. So that is another intersectionality lens to actually say, it's not just the women that need to be nurtured and molded for leadership. What are we doing with the institution? Is there a measure to actually say, these are the institutions we have? Are the practices, are the cultures within those institutions embracing of difference and accommodating of women? So I think we need a multi-pronged approach. One approach is not going to do it, because we go back to the toxic environments that women come from in the first place.
I'm going to read you another one. It says, recently there was a webinar, again from the director at HERS. They had a webinar at HERS for support women staff. And there's a feeling that resources are indeed allocated for women academics, yet no programs for support for women. So there was something about kind of unique for academics, but of course we know that women also occupy other positions at university.
It goes back to holistic approach, intersectionality. It's not just the academics. Of course, you choose, I'm going to focus on this, or I'm going to focus on the other. But at institutional level, you actually have to see all the disciplines, all the sectors that make the institution functional and support them. And the support services are critical for a well-functioning institution. What are we doing about that? Does the research include them? I saw earlier on, they were asking the same thing. So I think we need to be deliberate about inclusion at all levels.
Right, and I'm just seeing the comments coming through saying we call them past staff or admin staff, support staff, and that's what we're saying. We also call them staff in the third domain. So this third element of universities that is emerging as domain that needs to be professionalized, and that is usually, there's quite a gendered component there, and that needs unique support that isn't academic support, but other support.
Yeah.
There's a suggestion to say that we need one day to come up with a testimony conference, using it as a checklist, hearing it from women who experienced the before and after of these programs, of course, sharing what processes that worked for them or the programs that worked for them. I've got one last question for you, and then I'd like some closing comments from all our speakers. The question is, at a practical level, what would the implementation of a measurement system look like? Not quite sure I understand it. Can you see that in the chat?
I can see it. I'm also not sure if I understand it. And I actually thought maybe it's because I'm not an academic. So
no, I think it's maybe just, I think it's, can you see it? So I think what I'm understanding, I think it might, I think what the question, or perhaps what it's triggering in me, is saying that we're measuring women and men differently. And I, have some thoughts on whether we should have a differentiated system that measures output or measures teaching load or measures things differently. What are your thoughts on that?
It's actually interesting you mentioned that, because I know the criteria for promotion is not just research papers, though that's part of it, but it's also community service. But if you look at women, they tend to do more in terms of the teaching load, a lot of admin and what have you. So it's either you get a different, what do you call it, have it done elsewhere to enable the women to focus on research, if your prioritization as a university is research, or you actually measure it equally. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but I'm saying, if we know women are loaded with one of the three criteria that we measure, rewarded at the same level then as all three criteria. Because what I tend to hear women saying is that you actually do a lot of what could be called community service, and yet it's not recognized. So we need to be sensitive when we prioritize the 3 or 4 things that we use for promotion of people. And I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I want to go towards asking all our speakers to put their cameras on, and I want to ask you to make some closing comments. If I give you 2 minutes each, or 1.5 minutes each, I'd like you to comment a little bit on kind of what this presentation has meant for you. What have you, gleaned from your fellow speakers, and how has this impacted you being here? Cyrill, can I start with you? Am I putting you on the spot?
No, no, thank you. It's been great. Thank you, Judy and Denise. It's an honor to be and share the platform with you. It's wonderful to see the work that you're doing, Denise, and your fellowship program. It's just wonderful to see women supporting woman. I think that's what warms my heart, is that we're here and we're creating something for each other in the sector. We're not working in our silos. And so that for me is encouraging, that we are there for each other. I definitely want to keep the professional communication going between my colleagues, and that for me is promising. I think just to participants, what I want to say, my colleagues and I, we're doing a virtual seminar with VUT next week, and a way to disseminate the research and get it out there is to talk about it. And so we're very happy to come to your institution and just ask us, be it your department, be it your faculty, and talk about our findings. So please use the opportunity to contact me and ask for us to come and talk, be it a lunchtime meeting or be it, you know, a formal seminar. We think it's important that it's research that actually has a place in society, that is compelling, and that makes a difference. So thank you everybody.
Thank you, Cyrill. That's lovely. If I can just extend your point about coming to institutions, I think the institutional forums are well placed to invite you. They love doing institutional forums. That's, you know, kind of their role, to think about institutional practices. So if you can each ask your institutional forums in your institutions to invite Dr. Walters and her colleagues, that would go a long way of stimulating these conversations in your context. Professor Zinn.
Thank you very much. I know we have only a few minutes. It's been such a privilege to be on the platform with Cyrill and Judy. Both of your presentations were really inspiring. I think the research that's been done by Cyrill and the team is groundbreaking, and we really welcome that they are willing to come and speak about it wherever, because it just opens eyes. And then Judy, some of the things that you've spoken about, the intersectionalities, but also the program, the recognizing of issues that need to be named. Thank you so much for that. It's also a privilege to have heard about some of the things you are doing at WITS. And then just finally about the issue of measurement that came up from one of our colleagues in the audience. I do think we need to be monitoring this, but monitoring it differently. So the issue about measurement, implementation of these, I think we need to find different indicators of what shows that change is happening, and they need to be more qualitative, such as the ones in the interviews that were done by the CARS study. I think also building the arc, if I can bring it full circle to that particular image, building arcs, really getting involved in doing things that can be measured and can be seen to implement agency and support agency is really important. So thanks very much to all of you for this panel. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Dr. Dlamini.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was such an honor to share the platform with you, Denise, Cyrill, Birgit. We are here to actually help build the arc with you. I think it's through collaboration across the institutions that will make this a better society for all. And, you know, I always look at the silos, even within institutions of the disciplines, you know, that doesn't help. I think the more collaboration across institutions, across disciplines, across even the support staff that we've had quite a bit of support staff saying, what about us? Even the research, what about us? So we have to do something about that. But thank you, it's such an honor, and thanks, Oliver.
Thank you very much for all the speakers, and I want to thank also Oliver, our introductory, for your introductory comments. Our time is almost up. I want to particularly greet the FELV members, the WIL members who are in the audience, and I want to thank you all for being here, and I wish you a happy day further.